So you are here for IEP Basics. So first of all, Matrix Parent Network. I hope all of you are a little bit familiar with us, but our job is to empower families of children with special needs. And we want you to become successful advocates. That's our job, is to help you do your job as an advocate for your child. My name is Margaret, and I've been a parent advisor at Matrix Parent Network for 9 years now, I believe. Hardly seems it's possible that it's that long. I have 2 kids who had IEPs. They're both grown and out of the house now, but I went through a lot of IEP meetings with both of them, and so I have personal experience as well as professional experience with this. And so it's just a reminder that we're not attorneys and we're not advocates. Our job, again, is to help you become a good advocate and to support you. And we hope you'll call us for support whenever you need to. Today, what we're going to cover is, a definition of special education, a little bit about the laws, the process you can expect, talking about eligibility, who's eligible for special education, what an IEP actually is, and how you as a parent can contribute to the process. We're going to ask you to answer this question. What do you think special education actually is? And you have 4 choices: a place where students can go to get help, instruction tailored to meet the needs of individual students, only available to students who need one-to-one support, or a classroom for students with disabilities. What is special education? It's specialized academic instruction, educational programs and practices, related services, and go ahead to the slide. For students whose identified disability, and this is whether it's cognitive, physical, or emotional functioning, requires special education teaching approaches, equipment, or care within or outside a regular classroom. So that's quite a mouthful, but basically it's saying it's the services and program that your child needs in order to be able to access their curriculum in school. It's not a specific classroom. Your child might be assigned to a special day class, but not necessarily. So it's a range of services that can be provided. And again, we have to stress that IEPs are individualized, so it could be different. The services can be provided in different ways, in different settings to different learners. And the really important bottom line is that the students are given the resources they need to make progress in school. Recently, a couple of years now ago, there was a Supreme Court decision, and it changed what the standard is for IEPs. It used to say that progress in education was something more than trivial. And the Supreme Court reviewed this and said, that's sort of ridiculous. We need a higher standard than that. So the standard now is that programs must be appropriately ambitious, and every child should have the chance to meet challenging objectives. And to the extent possible, children are supposed to be meeting goals that put them on grade level for the curriculum that they should be getting at their particular grade. That isn't always possible, but to the extent it is, that's what the goal would be. The other thing to keep in mind is that education is not just academics. You may have had the situation in the past where if you're talking about whether your child needs special education, maybe your child's needs are emotional or social, and the school's saying, well, they're not that far behind academically. That's not the whole deal. Education is an experience, and it is to learn social and emotional skills as well as academic skills. It's being able to participate in everything that's going on at school. So it's important that is recognized in the IEP process. So we're going to talk a little bit about the law that sets up special education. It's called IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it has several components that you need to become aware of. All of these items that you see on the blackboard here are important concepts in IDEA, and we actually have them listed on the next page. So it's assessment, the IEP itself, FAPE, or free appropriate education, least restrictive environment, participation by parents and students, and the rights of the parents and students in the process. And we'll move through each one of them briefly and define them. So we'll go on to assessment. The whole IEP process starts with an assessment, and it's an assessment that addresses all of your child's areas of concern, every area in which you have a suspected disability. And if your child doesn't yet have an IEP and you suspect a disability, you request an assessment from the school in order to get the process started. If you happen to be at this point, if you're not yet, if your child does not yet have an IEP, but you think maybe they need one, please feel free to give us a call. We do have sample assessment letters available on our website, and we can talk you through the process and help you understand how to get started if you're at that point. Or if you're at the point of getting a triennial assessment and you need a little help understanding what's in it, please do let us know. So next, IEP, Individualized Education Plan. The IEP is three things, really: a program, a document, and a meeting. So it gets a little confusing. Someone says, my child's IEP. What are they talking about? The physical plan that you have, program that you have in writing as a document, or the actual services they're getting, or the meeting at which you discuss it. It's all three of these things. So the next concept, free appropriate public education. Every child is entitled to free appropriate public education. And unfortunately, it does not mean the best possible education. We as parents always want the best possible for our child, but that's not what the law guarantees. It guarantees appropriate. And appropriate means that to the extent possible, they can access the curriculum and make educational progress. The school is required to make an offer of FAPE. And so you may have heard this during the IEP meeting. The school says, this is our offer of FAPE, when they lay out what they propose to do to help your child. Least restrictive environment. I'm sure if you've been through IEP meetings, you've heard this term tossed around also. It means that the child, if possible, should be educated at their home school in a general education classroom with typically developing peers with services and supports. And that is, if to the extent possible. That may or may not be possible. Your child may need the support through a small classroom run by a special education teacher, which would be considered a special day class. Your child's needs may be great enough that they need a non-public school or a county-run classroom, something run by, say, the Sonoma County Office of Ed, Marin County Office of Ed, Solano County Office of Ed. All of them have regional programs that are a little more intense than the local special day classes. So restrictiveness is defined by how far you get from homeschool, general education, and typically developing peers. And so a special day class is considered more restrictive than general education with supports. A non-public school is more instructive than that. And home instruction is about the most restrictive because the children are not with their typically developing peers at all. And then, of course, then there's residential, which is the most restrictive type of environment. The school is always going to be pushing you towards what they consider least restrictive. So, student and parent participation. As a parent, you're a member of the IEP team that develops the program and oversees the program. So you should always participate in decisions that are made about your child's special education program. To the extent possible, students should be allowed to participate. And this is a judgment call and depends a lot on both their age and how well they do in in participating in meetings like this, we like to suggest that it's good for children to learn self-advocacy, and the sooner they're able to participate, the better, probably. I mean, this is a judgment call you're going to have to make as a parent, but think about the fact that it's empowering to the student to participate. And sometimes, even when the kids are little, it might be worthwhile to have your child come into the meeting at the beginning of the meeting and just meet the members of the team, be told these are the people who are here to try to help you. And also, so the team members all see the child, and the meeting then is more focused on the child than on all the piles of paper that everybody has in front of them. At age 16, it's required that students are invited to participate in the IEP meeting. They're not required to participate, but they must be invited and allowed if they wish to. So special education principles include rights of parents and students in the process. And there's something called procedural safeguards that are developed to protect your rights as spelled out in the law. And you've probably received copies of these. If you've been to an IEP meeting, you've received a copy of procedural safeguards. You probably get them at every single IEP meeting you go to. Almost nobody ever actually sits down and reads them, and you really should. They're not written for easy understanding, but fight your way through them anyway. And becoming familiar with you and your child's rights will empower you as a participant in the process. So we're going to have a little pop quiz. And I noticed looking at it that we didn't go over one of the things in here, but we'll see how everybody does, and then we'll go over the questions. Okay, so first, education is more than just academics, and school is for the purpose of preparing your child for life after school. So that is true. Sometimes we focus only on the academics, but school is about more than that. And we certainly hope by the time your child either gets their high school certificate or diploma that they are ready for life. That's what the goal is. So the second question, if you're requesting an assessment, you should do so in writing. It should not be just a verbal request. Always put it in writing, even if it's an email. Keep a copy of your email so you know that the request has been made. And there are timelines then that kick in once you've made that written request. The school has 15 days to get back to you to say whether or not they will do the assessment. If they are not going to, they have to give you a written explanation of why not and the data they use to make that decision. If they are going to do the assessment, they send you an assessment plan and ask you to sign giving your permission. And then they have 60 days to complete the assessment and then have an IEP meeting with you to explain the results and if your child is eligible, what they propose in terms of a program. True or false, the school has 10 days to respond to a parent's written request. It's actually 15 days. And then a non-public school is considered more restrictive, not less restrictive than a special day class at a public school. So the further you get from general education, the more restrictive it's considered. Okay, we'll go on now. So next, who is eligible for special education? There are 13 categories, and your student has to fit into one of those categories. So they have to fit into the category that says they have a disability. It has to be shown to have an impact on their education. So, you may have gotten a diagnosis saying your child has autism, but if you're not seeing the impacts at school, then that doesn't necessarily make them eligible. It also says that they need special education services in order to benefit from their education. So it's all three of these requirements, not just having the disability. The students are eligible between the age of 3 and 22. Eligibility ends at the child's 22nd, or young adult by that time, young adult's 22nd birthday, unless. So there are situations where your child may be in special education and then become ineligible. And why might this be? Well, sometimes kids are in for something like a speech impediment, and they actually, through getting services, overcome that. So that would be a simple example. Your child may have ADHD, but has learned to cope very well with their attention issues. So there are situations where a child would become ineligible. Often, children that are eligible for their whole school career. The next thing is, of course, that if your child graduates with a regular diploma at age about 18, then that's the end of special education. If you're concerned about your child getting a diploma and going on to university, community college, or other further education like that, they still can get 504 accommodations, but no special education after they get a diploma. So here are the 13 categories. I'm not going to read through all of them. They have to fit into one of these categories. And again, these categories are not diagnoses, they're categories, and each one is defined in the law. One of the things I wanted to note is that you may not have seen up there a category either for sensory processing disorder or ADHD. These are not eligibility categories. However, children with these disabilities are often made eligible in the category of other health impairment. And that's sort of a catch-all category that basically says any medical condition that prevents the child from paying full attention. So it could be ADHD, it could be medications the child's taking, it could be a number of things, but just because there isn't a category that says sensory processing or ADHD doesn't mean they can't be made eligible. Usually on the first page of the IEP, you will see a primary eligibility and sometimes a secondary eligibility. So one or two things may be listed. And, we know that some of these things go together, that often children have more than one disability that is affecting their education. Also be aware that schools do not diagnose. The school is not supposed to tell you that your child has ADHD. They can say they have executive functioning problems or they have trouble paying attention. They're not supposed to say your child has autism. They say your child has autistic-like behaviors. So the diagnosis is given by a medical professional. The category, the eligibility category, is defined by the school. I think I mentioned 504 accommodations briefly before, but there's another law that protects children from discrimination. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1983 says that there should not be barriers to children with disability being able to participate in school. And so there are some kids who, after they do the assessment, they say, well, your child doesn't really meet the criteria for special education, but he or she may be then eligible for a 504 plan. And a 504 plan does not provide services like speech therapy or specialized instruction, but it does provide accommodations. And accommodations may mean things like getting extra time to complete their assignments or taking their tests in a separate room free of distractions. Things like that may be provided as accommodations even if the child isn't eligible for special education. If you find yourself in that situation and you want to discuss 504 plans, again, please feel free to call our helpline, or we do have a 504 packet on our website. And if anytime you're looking for things on your website and you can't find them, please either call us or shoot us the helpline an email, and we'll steer you to where you can find those or send you a link. And also be happy to talk to you about it. So now, what is an IEP? So let's talk about the IEP process. There is a particular order that the process is supposed to follow. And we've talked about the fact that it all starts with the assessment. And the assessment determines the child, whether the child is eligible or not. But the other thing it's supposed to do is identify the strengths, concerns, needs, and present levels of ability. So it's supposed to pinpoint those areas where your child is struggling, those strengths that your child has that can be used to help them, and what they can do currently. Based on that, in every area where there is some struggle or some problem, the child is not performing at grade level, then there should be a goal. So the goal will say, and we'll go over this a little bit more later on, but what the child can do now and what we expect the child should be able to do a year from now. And then based on those goals, the team should be deciding on what services are needed, what accommodations are necessary, do there need to be modifications to the curriculum, and all of this should be spelled out. And then finally, the last thing is the decision on placement, where the education is actually going to take place. Often we find that placement is the parent's primary concern. They go into the process wanting to talk about, is my child going to be in this special day class? How many hours is the child going to be in the resource room? Things of that nature. Or can my child be assigned to a non-public school like ANOVA or Star Academy? That's often the thing that's on the top of the mind of the parent. And they get very frustrated because that's the last thing in the order of the process that's supposed to be considered. So just be aware of that. If you're in a meeting and it seems to be forever getting to that discussion about placement, that's the way the meeting is supposed to progress. And this next slide is a very complicated flow chart that we drew up that describes how everything fits together. But I think if you just remember that ordering of the way things are supposed to flow from assessment and eligibility to defining needs, defining present levels, goals, services, and placement. It's important to remember that ordering rather than try to remember this complicated chart, which we did give you. What is an IEP? A program developed in a meeting and written down in a document. So it is all three of those things. And that is sometimes confusing. So let's first talk about what is the IEP program. So remember the definition we gave you, that sort of mouthful of a definition: specialized academic instruction, educational programs and practices, related services. For students whose identified disability requires special teaching approaches, equipment, or care within or outside a regular classroom. So it's really the whole set of programs, practices, curriculum, services, accommodations, specialized equipment, technology. All of these things constitute the program of special education for your child. So what does the program consist of? And we went through this a little bit before, but this is the order of things we have to think about. Goals. So there are goals in the IEP. Based on those goals, what accommodations or modifications are required, what specialized instruction is required, what related services like occupational therapy, speech therapy, adaptive PE, what kind of services are needed, and then finally, placement that is needed in order for your child to make educational progress. All of this is written down in a document. So if you understand the elements of a program and how they're laid out in a document, you'll be prepared for the meeting. So think about this document sort of like a contract. You should take it seriously. Everything should be written down and it should be accurate. So it's going to contain a lot of information about your child and their program, all the things we talked about, the results of the assessment, their present level of performance, the goals, the services, the placement. It includes what's called the district offer of FAPE. So the school will say to you, this is our offer of FAPE when they're talking about the services and the placement that are provided. So remember the standard for FAPE, that the child is reasonably ambitious. The child should, to the extent possible, be making progress on grade level curriculum. So don't let the document undercut your child's ability. It's supposed to be, reasonably ambitious. This is a fairly long form and a big pile of paper with this. All this is handed to you at a meeting, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. And certainly you're not going to have the chance to read through the entire document as you're going through the meeting. If you want to know more about what should actually be in this IEP document, we have a separate training called the IEP form, one page at a time. And in this training, we actually just take the IEP forms and go through page by page and talk about what important information should be on each page of the IEP document. So, if you're interested in that, please feel free to sign up for that workshop. I don't remember the date of that. It's coming up in October, I think the third week of October, but it will be on our calendar, and you should be on our email list and get notification of that, but be sure to check our calendar if you don't see something coming up on that. So present levels of performance are sometimes abbreviated PLOPs, present levels of performance. They're at the beginning of the document, usually starting about the second page. And they should include a description of what your child's current abilities are. And that can be based on the formalized assessment that was done, if you're just entering an IEP or you just had a triennial assessment. But it should also include reports from the teachers and therapists and observations that are made, especially if this is the years between the triennial assessment. The school should be continuing to assess and observe and evaluate how well the child is doing and what they can do, and define that at the beginning of each annual IEP. It's also found on the goals pages. So you can think of a present level as the same thing as a baseline for a goal. And we'll go on to the next slide at this point. So the goals are based on the student's needs as they're described in those present levels. And they should be SMART. Probably if you've been through any goal setting exercise, you've heard this acronym, SMART, which stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And when you think about each individual goal, you should go through and say, is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it attainable, realistic, and is there a time to it? Usually the time is 1 year. If your child has short-term benchmarks, there may be shorter time frames, but usually it's part of the annual IEP process. So it's what your child can do now and what he or she should be able to do a year from now. So in each goal, you're going to see present levels or a baseline on the left side. This is how the child's currently performing. And then on the right side, this is the goal. This is what they should be able to do a year from now. And it should state very clearly how it's going to be measured and who's responsible for the child being able to attain that goal. That's not the child, it's the teacher or the therapist. Another thing that we often say is that the goal should meet the stranger test. That means if somebody who's never met your child, doesn't know anything about your child, should be able to read the goal and visualize in their mind what the child will be doing if they attain that goal. So related services, based on the student's goals, then we talk about what kind of services are needed in order that the child is able to meet those goals. And they need to be described in both frequency and duration. How often and for how long a period of time. So for example, the child will receive 1/2 hour of speech therapy once a week. It might be more than that. It might be twice a week. It might be a 40-minute session, but it should be described what your child should be getting so that you can then evaluate whether they're actually getting that service. It may include speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, amended physical education, what's called educationally related mental health services, often abbreviated as ERMs, and transportation. Transportation, if it's included in your child's IEP, that is considered a related service. All of those things should be well defined in the document. And then finally, there is a discussion of placement. And it is based on needs, not on what your child's disability is. You can have 2 children with the same disability, and one may be best educated in a special day class and the other in a general education classroom. So don't let them say, because your child has Down syndrome, they need to be in a special day class. That's not necessarily the case. It's based on the individual child's individual needs. And it should be least restrictive. So if you think your child should be in general education and the school is saying they need to be in a special day class, the law would be on your side to argue for what can be done to get them into the general education classroom. And remember that the placement is discussed after we talk about the assessment, the goals, and the services. Based on what placement the school is recommending, you should be allowed to visit any potential placement so that you can see for yourself whether you think it will work for your child. And if you do have the opportunity to view a placement and you come back from that thinking, no, this just isn't going to work, then you should ask for another IEP meeting to discuss other possibilities. There should be a discussion of all the different placements that would be available and why the school thinks that what they're recommending is the most appropriate. So finally, this document is discussed and evaluated and developed as part of a meeting, an IEP meeting. As we show the graphic with all these people sitting around the table, there's often a lot of people at that meeting. You need to remember that you are an equal member of the team. So how many IEP meetings do you have? The requirement is that there be at least one meeting once a year, an annual IEP meeting. But you can request additional meetings at any time in writing. Always request in writing. Don't just mention it to the special ed teacher. Always request it in writing. And if you request a meeting, the law says there should be one held within 30 days. Don't do this trivial, don't be trivial about your request. If you just have to have a discussion with the special ed teacher to work out one little thing, then you shouldn't call for an IEP meeting. But if you're really concerned about how the IEP is functioning, whether your child's getting the services they need, whether they're making progress, then you should ask for the whole team to get together and have an IEP meeting and consider whether things need to be changed. So have a purpose in mind if you call a meeting. Now, it's best practice for everyone that's on the team to be present for the meeting. If there is a team member who cannot be there, then you will be asked to sign a waiver acknowledging and allowing for that team member to not be there. And that might be okay and it might not be okay with you. Just be aware that if there's somebody that you think needs to be at that meeting and they're not able to be there, it is perfectly within your right to say, we should not be having this meeting. We should adjourn the meeting and reschedule when that team member can be present. So use your judgment on this. There may be a situation if your child's in a specialized program and the therapist and the resource teacher, the special education teacher is there, and the gen ed classroom teacher isn't there, maybe that's okay. But if the discussion at the meeting is how can we get this child back into a general education classroom, or what would the child be learning if they were in general education, then it's pretty important that that general education teacher be present. So use your judgment and don't just say, oh yeah, fine, if the school says so-and-so can't be at the meeting. Think about whether it's vital for that key member of the team to be there. So who is the IEP team members? First of all, you are a team member and you should always be present at a meeting unless you say you don't want to be there. The IEP team needs to go out of their way to get you to participate. They're supposed to make sure you have every opportunity to participate in the meeting. And so, for example, if a meeting is scheduled at a time when it's just very difficult for you to make it, you can say, you know, I can't come at that time. You need to find a different time to have the meeting. You know, they're hard meetings to schedule, so don't do that flagrantly. But if you really can't come at the time they set up, do ask that the meeting be rescheduled. A classroom teacher, a general education teacher, should be present, as should the special education or resource teacher. There should be the school principal or some representative of the school district. This is an administrator or decision maker who can actually, if the team decides the student needs a particular service, someone who can make the decision to make that happen. Sometimes the district psychologist is designated as a district representative, but somebody in a decision making should be there. And if it's not apparent to you who that person is, feel free to ask which team member is serving that role. And then depending on what services your child is getting, there may be other team members such as the speech therapist or the occupational therapist. Sometimes even the bus driver if transportation is the issue. So there are specialized kinds of IEP meetings in addition to just the annual IEP meeting that can be held in certain circumstances. There is something called a manifestation determination, and hopefully not too many of you have experienced this. This is a meeting that has to be held if your child is getting suspended frequently or if they are threatening to expel your child. Before that can happen, there has to be a specialized IEP meeting to determine whether the behavior that's leading to suspension or expulsion is a manifestation of the disability. And if it is, then they cannot continue to suspend or expel your child, although they can talk with you about changing the child's placement to a different setting, in which they may be able to get a higher level of service or be able to perform better. Transition planning is another kind of specialized meeting. So if your child is going from preschool to kindergarten, or from elementary school to middle school, from middle school to high school, or from high school to a transition program, an 18 to 22-year-old transition program, or from either high school or the transition program to adult life beyond school. Each of those is a transition that requires a special meeting to talk about what's going to be done to make that transition work. So during the IEP meeting, as we have said before, you're a member of the team. You should be able to fully participate. If the meetings start and you don't know who all of the members are, they should all be introduced. You may know all the people sitting around the table and you may not. It's important that everyone is introduced and you know what their function is at the meeting. Also, you should know at the outset how much time is being allowed for this meeting. It's very frustrating if you don't feel like everything has been discussed and all of a sudden someone says, well, oops, I only had an hour and now I have to leave. So make sure at the outset of the meeting you know how much time is being allowed. And for an annual meeting or a triennial meeting, it should be, an hour and a half, 2 hours at least devoted to the meeting. If it's a specialized meeting for a very defined, discrete purpose, it might be shorter than that. And I've known IEP meetings that go on much longer than that as well. But figure out at the beginning how much time is allowed and whether all the members can stay for the entire meeting. You can ask for clarification anytime teachers or specialists start throwing out jargon or referring to something that you are not familiar with. Don't hesitate to ask for clarifications. Take notes during the meeting. If you have somebody else who can be at the meeting with you to help you take notes, that's always a good thing. And if you get to a point where you feel you need a break, don't hesitate to ask for one. These meetings can be overwhelming. Everybody at the meeting there is a professional and you are the parent. And sometimes, they're being very clinical in their discussion. You as a parent can be very emotional because it's your child they're talking about. So if you get to the point of needing a break and just feeling like, if I don't get a chance to calm down a little bit, I'm going to start screaming, ask for a break, and then don't be ashamed to do that. You can always just say, I need to go to the restroom and, I'll be back in 10 minutes. When you're in the meeting, it's always important to think about your relationship with the team members and that you're going to be working with these people for a long time. Acknowledge when they have made good efforts, show gratitude for the things they have done, so that, they understand you do appreciate what they are doing when you're talking about additional things you may want for your child that maybe they aren't doing at the current time. Try to keep it positive to the extent you can. When you get to the end of the meeting, you will be getting probably by email a copy of the IEP meeting document to sign. And you need to think about it before you sign it. There are two things that you're usually asked to sign. One is your attendance at the meeting. And of course, if you're at the meeting, you sign saying, I was at the meeting. And everybody else who is at the meeting is asked to sign saying they were there as well. There should be a document of who was in the room. And this is whether it was in a physical room or in the Zoom room. And you don't have to immediately consent. You should, and you can and you should take time to read the entire document and make sure you understand it. So taking a few days to do this, there's no problem with that. They're not actually supposed to begin giving your child services until you consent in some manner, but usually a few days passing is not going to be a problem. Don't wait weeks and weeks to sign it and get back. If you have a major disagreement, then you should call for another meeting to resolve it. And remember that when you do sign, you can sign saying, I agree with the entire thing, or I agree with part and not all of this. There is a box to check that says, I agree with the exception of. And there's a tiny little line that gives you a space to write what you don't agree with, but you can always attach another piece of paper saying, these are the things I don't agree with when you're signing agreement to the rest of it. Ask questions if you have questions. If you get the document and you don't understand something in it, you can call your child's teacher or principal and ask what that means, or one of the therapists. You can call us if you don't understand some of the things in it and ask us to go over it with you. Ask all those questions before you sign the document. Now, it is possible to get changes after you sign it, but it's a lot easier if you haven't yet consented. And as I mentioned, if you are really not in agreement with most of what's in the document, you should ask for another meeting to try to resolve those differences. So we've already gone over you can consent to all, part, or none of it. You can always call our helpline for help on reviewing it. And if you've signed the IEP and a couple months later you think it's not going well, do call for another meeting, ask in writing so that you can have a discussion with the entire team and problem solve and try to figure out what's wrong and how to solve the problems. So if we do run into situations where you have disagreements, and this is inevitable, there will be times when you disagree with the rest of the team on what should be done and what services should be provided. Try to solve the problem as close to the source of the problem as possible. Go up the chain of command, start with the classroom teacher, go to the principal if the classroom teacher isn't being cooperative. If you are working with the resource teacher and you can't resolve problems, talk to the district special ed director. Use that hierarchy when you're trying to solve problems. Start at the bottom and work your way up. Everybody has a boss, so if you can't solve the problem with the person you're immediately dealing with, there's somebody who they report to that you should be then talking to. Try to be calm and clear in your communication. Things like, you're just not doing your best for my child. It doesn't get you very far. Try to say what specifically isn't working if you can figure that out. What your observations are. This is what I'm seeing. Try to explain to the team what your issues are and be calm in your presentation of those issues. This is difficult, so take time to calm down before you start talking to your team members. If you're writing emails, read it and reread it before you push the send button. Talk to other people. Document the process you've gone through to solve problems. Keep copies of all your emails. Keep a phone log of conversations you've had so that you can show that you've made an effort to solve the problem. Realize that you're going to be working with these team members sometimes for a long time, and you don't want to destroy those relationships by being really disagreeable in the process. Remember, you can disagree and advocate for your child without being disagreeable. We're going to have another little pop quiz. Okay, so the first question, we had a few people that missed this question. Sensory processing disorder is not one of the 13 eligibility categories. It is possible for a child with sensory processing disorder to be made eligible in the category called other health impairment, which is abbreviated as OHI. So that's a little bit of a technicality, but do be aware that a diagnosis from a medical professional of sensory processing disorder sometimes is difficult. It's difficult sometimes to demonstrate that child may need an IEP and may need to be put in the OHI category. The second meeting, it looks like most everybody agreed with this, and it is true that if you consent to a member of the team not being present, and everyone agrees that they don't need to be present, including you, then they can skip the meeting. Just be aware that even though this is possible, if you want that team member to be present, you can insist upon it. A parent should ask for an IEP meeting at least 2 times a year. Well, it might be a good idea, but what's required is 1 annual meeting. And you should only ask for another IEP meeting if you feel like something isn't going as well as you think, or you don't understand whether your child's making progress. There should be an issue that brings up the need for another IEP meeting. And then finally, hurrah, everybody got that correct. The parent is an equal member of the IEP team. How can parents contribute to an IEP meeting? Well, you already are contributing because you're here and you're learning and you're preparing for your child's next IEP meeting. So clearly you want to participate and are doing so. So first of all, being prepared is very important. Um, Asking for any kind of reports or assessments in advance of the meeting uh, is a good idea. And if this is not a triennial, there's no big assessment document, you can ask, if you want, you can ask for a draft of the goals that the team is recommending prior to the meeting. And you can have a little back and forth with the different teachers and therapists about whether those are the correct goals, whether there need to be additional goals, understanding what the goal is about. You can do a little bit of that before the meeting, and sometimes things will go better if you come into the meeting really understanding those things. Um, you can ask, you don't always get them. Therapists and teachers are busy, but you can ask for pre-meetings to go over specific details in advance of the meeting, and it's often a good idea to do so. Understanding your child's disability is important and how it manifests in them. We know that all children with the same disability do not present in the same way. And you are probably the person in the best position to explain how autism affects your child, how ADHD affects your child, how a learning disability, how a hearing problem, how it is manifesting in your own child, rather than just as a general description of a disability. And, and especially if your child has a somewhat rare condition, you may be the one educating the rest of the team on what that disability is and how it impacts your child. Um, not resource teachers and special ed teachers and general education teachers should have a general understanding of disability, but they don't necessarily know about a rare genetic disorder or a medical condition. So you may have to be in the situation where you're doing the educating. You know your child better than anybody else on the team, and that's your area of expertise. So, have confidence in that and use that knowledge um, to the best effect in the meeting. Being organized means keeping all your reports and notes and work samples together where you can access them. We usually recommend having a binder with tabs, one for the IEP, one for the assessment, and one for work samples, one for correspondence. That's how we generally approach organization. But some of you may be more able to do that with some kind of digital format. Doesn't matter how you do it as long as you have all the information you need at your fingertips when you go into an IEP meeting. Second, it's a good idea to write down your concerns before the IEP meeting so that you're entering the meeting with those things written down. There is a portion, a part of the IEP form where it says, describe what the parent's concerns are. And you can actually have a few sentences, a paragraph that you want to dictate and ask them to include in the IEP document. But furthermore, have your own agenda, so to speak, the list of concerns you want to cover in the meeting, and write it down. It's very easy when you get in these meetings and 6 or 7 people are talking, and they are all wanting to talk about things that are important to them. If you don't have this all written down, it's quite possible that you forget to address something that was important to you. So go in, have your checklist, and share that with the team. Say, these are the issues that I want to go over in the meeting, so that you make sure those things get covered. Be collaborative in the meeting. Be someone who is collaborative and shows the team that you're trying to contribute in a positive manner. When they're doing things that are helpful to your child, let them know. Let them know you're grateful for their effort. Remember when you're going into an IEP team meeting, sometimes it can feel like it's me against them. But remember that all of these people went into education in order to help children. They're not there to see how they can be mean to your child or deny your child services. They are coming with the attitude of, what can we do to help this child? So don't ascribe bad intention to the team members. Assume they're trying to do good for your kid, and be grateful when they are. Be persistent in pointing out things that aren't happening and services that you think your child needs if they're not getting them. And you can be persistent, and you can be a good advocate without being disagreeable. It's also important to keep an open mind. You may go into a meeting thinking, I'm here to argue for my child getting 3 sessions a week of speech therapy rather than the one she's getting now. And you go in with that position and you're not going to be happy unless that happens. It may be that the team comes back and says, well, listen, we're having the speech therapist work with the classroom teacher. So the classroom teacher can be helping your child with their speech issues throughout the day, and that is more important than another session with a speech therapist. May or may not be true, but at least be willing to consider what your interest is. Your interest is having your child's speech problems addressed, and that your child gets the help they need. And so think about that interest rather than just your position or your demand, and keep an open mind as to whether what the school is suggesting might actually work. And maybe you want to say something like, well, let's try this for a couple months and see how it's working, and come back and have another meeting and assess whether your approach works or not. That is another option you can take. Reach out to us. Please call us before an IEP meeting if you would like to go over the reports, if you have the reports in time to do so, or if you've come out of an IEP meeting and you're wondering whether you should sign this or whether you should agree with it. And as we've said before, we can't give you legal advice. We're not psychologists and we're not attorneys, but we can help you think through and strategize. From our experience going to a lot of IEP meetings and reading a lot of reports and having some familiarity with the kinds of services that schools are likely or unlikely to provide. So we're getting towards the end here. Think about what you've learned and where you need more information and resources. Reach out to us to get those resources if you need to. There's lots of information on our webpage, but we're also happy to talk with you anytime. And reach out to us for support. We can maybe help you find a support group. It's not always easy. But also, if you just need to talk to somebody, sometimes being a parent with a child with a disability can feel very lonely, and it can be frustrating, and you can have lots of emotions you need to process. We are here to listen and support you, and we listen to all of your concerns without judgment, because all of us have been through this process, and we may not understand exactly what you're going through, but we have an idea of the sorts of things that are happening and what you might be experiencing. I think we are at the point where we're going to end. We do our best to keep all of our services free to parents, and we're happy to provide workshops and talk to you on the helpline for free. But if you are in a position that you're able to make a donation and you would like to make a donation, we would gratefully accept it. So again, thank you to everybody for attending and participating, and it's really nice to speak with all of you.